բարև բոլորին։ Ես շատ ուրախ եմ, որովհետև ես սիրում եմ Հայաստան, ես հայ չեմ, բայց իմ սիրտ հայ է։ It is such an honor to be able to be here today to speak on behalf of an organization that is near and dear to my heart, Desavandid Hayastan, otherwise known as Teach For Armenia. Now, I'm very conscious today that I am a man standing on a stage at an event intended to celebrate female innovation. And so I want to actually start by celebrating, there we go, the women of Teach For Armenia. In particular, I would like to celebrate the lady in the middle, Larissa Hovhannisyan, the founder and CEO of Teach For Armenia, one of my closest friends. Larissa started Teach For Armenia 10 years ago. This year, the organization is celebrating their 10th anniversary. And Larissa often tells me that when she first started Teach For Armenia, nobody took her seriously. She says that people treated her like a pupush, cute, young 20-year-old woman and didn't take her idea very seriously. Well, 10 years later, Teach For Armenia is now one of the most successful and influential educational nonprofit in its context. We now place 10%, we place teachers in 10% of public schools across the country. We have hundreds and hundreds of alumni who have finished the program and are going on to do amazing things for kids across the country. Now, you might not know who I am, so let me go ahead and pause and say a little bit about myself. So my name is Ruiz Clark. I am the former interim CEO of Teach For Armenia. I served as the interim CEO during the onset of the pandemic as well as the 2020 Artsakh War while Larissa was on maternity leave. Today, I've been asked to talk about Teach For Armenia's work in relation to artificial intelligence. For the past year, I've been at Harvard University looking at how artificial intelligence can be integrated into public education. So, to start, I'd actually like to introduce a model that comes from Harvard University called the PELP Coherence Framework. The PELP Coherence Framework is an educational model that can be used by education leaders to think about all the decisions that are needed in order to achieve system-level transformation in education. And I've adapted it for the purpose of AI integration. At the very heart of this model, you have the instructional core. The instructional core is the relationship between the student, the teacher, and the content that is being delivered. And around that instructional core is a hypothesis, the theory of change. What is the type of education that we're trying to deliver in the classroom to create a different future? And around that theory of change is then the strategy. What is the strategy that the school system is trying to implement to support that theory of change? And then surrounding that strategy are then the different components needed in order to bring that to life. The resources, the culture, the systems, the structures, etc. So during my talk today, I'm actually going to use this model to think with you about how AI could potentially be integrated into the Armenian context in our public schools. So to start, let's go ahead and look at the very heart, at the instructional core. At the instructional core. There we go. So like I said, the instructional core is the relationship between the teacher, the student, and the content that is being delivered. Now, the truth of the matter is that when it comes to artificial intelligence, students in public schools have had exposure to AI for decades now. You've heard earlier in other conversations that AI isn't completely brand new. It's been in development for decades now. The issue is that a lot of the AI that students have had exposure to up until now have been rudimentary forms of AI, pre-programmed to be able to respond to very simple responses. Now, with generative AI built on large language models, that changes the game. It opens up the opportunity for highly differentiated, personalized instructional models for students. Imagine a student in a math class who is struggling with basic arithmetic, sitting next to a student who is getting advanced coursework through an AI tutor. Now, there are already countries that are leading the way in this regard. China, South Korea, Singapore, Finland already have introduced their own AI tutors. Los Angeles Unified School District just a few months ago was the first district in the United States to introduce its own AI tutor to its students. With AI tutors, there's new possibilities for teachers to be able to meet the unique needs of many different students in the same class. However, and this brings me to the next one, is on systems and structures. Systems and structures. Specifically, I'd like to talk about data management. So the theme of this conference has to do with AI and big data. Now, AI and big data, when it comes to commerce, is incredibly powerful. You are able to collect a treasure trove of information about users so that businesses can adapt their practices to meet the trends that are out in the marketplace. When you overlay this with the student population in public schools, it can become highly problematic. In order for adaptive instructional systems, AIS, otherwise known as Gen AI for the purpose of education, in order for AIS to be effective, it needs to collect tons of information about the learner in order for it to be able to adapt to that learner's specific needs. What happens when you collect all of that information about a single individual and then you overlay that with other personal sets of data that a government might have? For example, their family data. What happens if that data gets mixed with things like medical information, personal information, their geolocation, where they live? Now, in surveillance states, you can imagine, highly problematic. Even in democracies where there's a lot of capitalism, this is also still incredibly problematic if we're not taking the right steps to protect the information of the student. So if you are working in the tech sector, I highly, highly recommend that we take a step back and consider that we have a moral obligation to ensure that we're masking the student information, the private identifiers of that child, and separating it from their learner information. The challenge is that a lot of the tools that are being introduced right now, earlier in another conversation we saw that right now 60% of the pie chart goes to ChatGPT at OpenAI. These models are open source. The beauty of these open source models or open source tools is that the more information we provide it, the smarter it gets. That's really problematic if a student is divulging personal information about themselves. So as a community, we have a responsibility to really think critically about how we are going to safeguard students and their data. Which brings me to the next point around resources. So we've talked a little bit about data infrastructure. Now I also want to talk about the resources that are needed in order to equip students with the technology necessary to support online learning. When Teach For Armenia, when the pandemic first hit Armenia, Teach For Armenia found that a fifth of our students living in rural Armenia did not have access to the right technology to support online learning. We raced to fill the void. Fortunately, because of our donors, we were able to secure $2.5 million to equip our students with devices. We purchased thousands and thousands of tablets and distributed them across the country. Well, that's been a few years now, and those devices are now obsolete. We are in a never-ending race to make sure that our students have the equipment necessary to be prepared for the future. The good news is that there are some bright spots. There are organizations that are doing really great work within the Armenian education ecosystem, in particular TUMO and Ardmat Labs. At Teach For Armenia, we are proud to partner with both of them. Now, I consider them stakeholders here because I believe that we're all stakeholders when it comes to public education. We all have a stake to play to make sure that the students in our public schools make sure that they receive an education that will prepare them for the future. Even if you don't have a child in the public education system, those individuals are going to go on to be the future talent of your companies, especially in a growing tech community like the one here in Armenia. So specifically with TUMO and Ardmat, there's two initiatives that they're doing that are particularly exciting. So Ardmont Labs over the last few years has been building Ardmont engineering labs across the public schools so that students have access to engineering labs. TUMO simultaneously is retrofitting shipping containers and equipping it with technology so that students have access to computer science coursework. Now, I would say that these are really great steps in the right direction, but it's not enough. During the pandemic, many school systems around the world realized that providing students with technology and internet access is no longer considered a luxury. It needs to be an important part of the strategy for a future-facing education. And there's no reason why Armenia cannot be at the forefront. Armenia is a small but mighty nation. And I say that because its size is an advantage. In countries like India and China, it is incredibly difficult to be able to equip every child with a device. In our context, we have a manageable student population. In addition to that, infrastructure is there. When Teach For Armenia distributed our tablets across the country, there was only one village where the internet connectivity wasn't strong enough, and we had to find another solution. Internet access across the country is a piece of your infrastructure that is something that should be leveraged. And then the third piece that I think creates an advantage for Armenia is the fact that it has a burgeoning tech sector. I think this conference is a really good example of that. So imagine what could happen if the tech community partnered with the Ministry of Education and organizations like Teach For Armenia, TUMO, et cetera, and if we created those bridges so that Armenia could be the first country in the region with an AI tutor and one-to-one computing, ensuring that every student has a device connected with AI. It's possible if we have the conviction and the resources to make it happen. In order to get there, we need a culture of collaboration and innovation. When I think about the opportunities for collaboration between the tech sector, nonprofits, as well as the public sector, the Ministry of Education, one initiative comes to mind that I think is a really good example. It's called Tech For Armenia. So Tech For Armenia was created a couple of years ago. It is a cooperation between large tech companies here in Armenia, Teach For Armenia, and the Ministry of Education. The program is such that we find talented individuals like yourselves working in the tech community, and we create a program where you're able to retain your current jobs while being trained by Teach For Armenia to fill vacancies in the school system, specifically in STEM subjects. You see, there are hundreds upon hundreds of critical vacancies across the school system, especially in STEM subjects. There are schools in this country that have gone without a math or science teacher for years. So through Tech For Armenia, individuals who do have a STEM background can, again, continue working in their current jobs while being trained by us to fill some of those critical vacancies. And so I wanted to actually share this idea because I think that's one of the examples of a collaboration that can exist between the tech community, organizations like Teach For Armenia, and the Ministry of Education. So to close out my talk for today, I actually want to share a couple resources in case you're interested in learning more about AI in public education. The first one is an article titled, "Who Will Control the Robots?" In an earlier talk today, one of the speakers talked about the lack of representation in tech and how that then creates a bias in how the AI is trained. I personally believe that these types of events are so critically important and makes me so excited to look out into the room and see so many women in tech because more representation is needed. As someone who comes from an underrepresented group, I am Mexican American, I'm very conscious that the Latina community is severely underrepresented in the tech community in the United States, especially in C-level positions. More of these type of events are needed. The other resource that I want to share is an AI implementation guide. that was co-authored between myself and a few other colleagues at Harvard University. It was written for a public school system just outside of Washington, D.C. And so if some of the points that I made today about making sure that we're taking the steps necessary to safeguard students, if you found that interesting, this AI implementation guide provides a lot more recommendations and guidance around policies, procedures, and other best practices that can be taken into consideration. So with that said, thank you very much. It was such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.